Hey, welcome to another Codecraft with the programming team here at Defiance. Everybody excited? Learn some programming, some craft.
Yeah.
All right, we're continuing through our design patterns, and the first one is proxy.
Yay.
Okay, everyone approves of proxy. Okay, so the second one. So, does anybody have an example of how they have used proxy in the past?
Almost all the time there's proxies in your internet.
Can't hear you, Tyler.
Almost all the time there's proxies in the internet, like between your computer and wherever you're going.
I'm talking about programming. You have programmed a
It's
proxy.
the same thing though, pretty well. It's just that in designs like classes, it's you're doing it like you're making it yourself. Kind of like it's just interfacing. You're just doing in between steps between one like a service and the caller.
Anybody else implement proxy?
Could we say that the fact system is kind of a proxy? Because it's that sort of like lazy instantiation sort of thing where it doesn't really exist until you ask for it.
Sort of, yeah. We don't really have a class in between, which is, I think, where it becomes a little bit less true. But yeah, there's a little bit of that nature of, hey, yeah, just let's. I think instead of using a class, really what you end up using oftentimes is a property to check to see does this exist or not.
Think of like I can see uses for the adapt and the facade. I guess that in most cases, when I'm trying to plug into a pre-existing system, I don't have the access that I need to make inheritance be helpful. Because my fear, I feel like using this wrong would be, I'm going to inherit from another system, but I can't reuse any of the methods. So I'm just creating new methods on the child that I have to call stuff. Like that's not a good solution at all. So I'm just kind of trying to figure out how to like this is when you have access to be able to handle some of the subclassing or to help you with those pieces. And so usually when I run into this problem, it's because somebody else has the code and then or not somebody else has the code. It's usually that I don't have that kind of access. So I'm using more of an adapter or a facade. So I guess that's where that's what I'm trying to think of internal uses so much.
Well, I don't think that's what the proxy is for. Like the adapter and the facade are allowing you to like work with other code, but I think the proxy is more for, hey, we have this heavyweight object, or we have this object that we don't want people to have access. So we're adding functionality around it to say, hey, we're only going to use this sometimes. So, I mean, in some ways, a singleton is a facade or is a proxy.
Yes.
Apart from singletons, which I was saying for, when we talk about singletons, or I guess when we had talked about singletons.
Yeah, the singleton is an example of a proxy, and we use it all the time with game. And it's also the way to do lazy load, right? So often your proxies are lazy loads, often. I had to think back a long ways. It probably doesn't mean anything to anybody, but back in the day, COM objects was the really big technology on the Windows platform. The ability to have Visual Basic or C++, we didn't even have C#, like compile down to this COM object, and then you could register these COM objects into process pools, and the COM objects would interact with one another. So we would have a COM object to go and connect to the Oracle database, or a COM object that would go and connect to the SQL Server database. And so you would use a proxy because who cares what database it is that you're getting this stuff from? And so a lot of code would expect there to be a database connection. And it's probably this is how the database connection is implemented in .NET, but it's not until you actually go to retrieve some records or something that it actually goes and connects to the database, right? So you can say, hey, new connection, here's my criteria and whatever and stuff. Now, maybe that creates a problem if you don't have access or whatever, so maybe it's to validate access. But anyway, it's possible to go a long ways before you actually have to retrieve stuff. And so the whole time you're working with a proxy, and then, oh, I need to retrieve something. Okay, I'll actually connect and verify and then pull the data for you. So it just reminded me of that, because COM objects would unload themselves from memory when the reference count went to 0. And so reference counting was something that it would have to do. So it's a smart systems approach of, hey, I'm a thing, and there's like 6 people that care about me, and now there's 5, and now there's 4, and now there's 0. And so when you hit the 0 mark, do you just disconnect from the database, right? Think of a web stack, right? Do you just disconnect from the database? No, because you're pretty sure there's a new HTTP request coming through, and so you want to keep that connection alive. But if it's been a while, the database can only serve so many connections, right? It can only hold so many connections open at a given time. I'm sure server architectures have improved in 20 years, but anyway. So if there's some kind of timeout or whatever that, hey, I'm at 0 reference count and it's been 90 seconds, drop it. And we'll just make a new database connection when we need it again. And so yeah, proxy, I used it for all that, but I try to think in Archmage of it. And I totally grant that this is not proper, like 100% proxy. But when I made the sprite cache, everywhere where something was looking for a sprite, I'm just like getting it from the cache, and it doesn't know that it's not a real sprite, that it's actually the cache coming from the cache. And I'm doing lazy load on it, and so it's pretending that it's like a sprite. If I really was to implement proxy, then I would have basically an extension of sprite, and then it really would be caching and doing those things, and you can track references and whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in a way that, and again, because I don't think that we could inherit things properly, I don't think that this would really work. But if we were inheriting from resources, and then we could override resources downloads,
yeah,
internally cached or things like that, which maybe it already internally caches, I don't know.
That's a great example of proxy. We, rather than just using straight resources.load, we could proxy it and then control, there's some setups and teardown, we want to track references or something like that, just for debugging purposes, right? Like just to know what is going on in this system. The proxy allows you to like hook into that and start seeing what's going on.
Yeah, you're doing stuff either before. Yeah, you're either doing stuff before or after your service.
Right.
But the idea of like having a logging proxy was something that I think is just sort of fun to be able to like, hey, let's just add this proxy wrapper around it. And so then we don't need to have any if conditions or strip out these logs or any of that. It's just, hey, we swap it out to use a logger proxy. Now we can see it happening. So that's sort of a fun way to just add some extra debug functionality.
Yeah, so Josh made a D-logger, so D is for defiance,
yeah,
as opposed to.
I'm not sure what could have been a better way to name it, and logger was already taken, I think. So
yeah, so that's great. It has good functionality that we like and use and such. But you have 90% of the code base that's still using debug.log. So what if there was a way to proxy debug.log, right? Now suddenly everything's going through the D-logger, and it doesn't even need a name anymore of D-logger, right? You're just hijacking and using the proxy. So that's an idea. I don't know if we need to do that, but that would be an implementation of proxy.
You were talking about smart references, and that's something we run into with the messenger system. So if you try to broadcast to a listener that's not there, we run into issues. So
right.
Like if we were to go and take that code and tweak that, we could say, hey, is anyone listening for this? And actually worry about it rather than just throw an error. Hey, you tried calling a thing and no one's listening.
So in terms of keeping the same interface, I was kind of curious how that would work, because I was trying to think about resources.load yesterday, but resources.load is a static method, which can't be virtual because it's static. Right. So how do you maintain the same interface in cases like that?
Yeah, that's
You can't.
You can't.
Yeah. Bad example.
If you had a resources.load where resources was an object that you have, where it's you have resources.instance.load or something like that, you have access to that more. But still, it's
Yeah, there's a conceptual like, hey, we could create something, our own resources, which has a resources.load, and then it like goes and hides that, and now you have to get all the code to call that thing rather than the Unity one, right? And it's the same issue with debug, because the debug is a static method as well, or debug.log. So, but conceptually, you could go in and do that. You could use namespaces in order to trick the compiler into using your thing instead of the other one.
I know, like a utility.random, like we have that where we're using system.random under the hood, but we never call it directly, so that we can always change it up.
Right.
So
Yeah, that's the approach. Unfortunately, you have to know that when you start. Which is a reason to do architecture when you start, rather than at the end or in the middle when you realize things are falling apart.
And I will say that thankfully going through and changing all the debug.logs, that's really easy. So some of the cases that we're talking about right now, it's like, okay, doing a mass find and replace for that, not a big deal. Obviously that's not always the case, but for this scenario, it's like, we can throw that together pretty quick.
One thing I was reading in the Gang of Four, but at the end of the this section, because it's the end of the structure stuff, it was talking about how different architecture pieces are kind of meant for different phases of the development life cycle. So like, for example, adapter pattern is typically more for later in the cycle because you have interfaces that don't work together and you want to plug them together. But then other stuff would go more towards the beginning. So I thought that was kind of interesting thinking of it that way.
Did they say proxy, like where it is in the cycle?
I don't remember them mentioning proxy specifically.
It strikes me as a late development thing, because you're like, oh crap, we're using this thing and we need it better or different or whatever.
Well, yeah, I mean, if we, in my mind, the classic example of proxies is always like networking, because that's very like used a ton in networking. It's like, so it's often like we proxy for like data manipulation of like, we want to log like stuff before we actually put it into like the database, right? Or we want to manipulate this before we put it in the database. So instead of like manipulating and changing the whole database, we just throw a proxy in there. Like, okay, we're going to add this now. We're going to add another proxy or something like that into this whole scheme of things happening before we throw this into the database and stuff like that. And so to me, that just screams like, this is like all kind of last minute or end of like the stuff's already kind of built and we're not going to go change that now. So now just throw something in between to kind of fix it or, you know, do something.
I don't know if it's always last minute. I think sometimes you're just like, hey, we need to add something sometimes.
Yeah.
So like we were talking about earlier, like if we want to have a logger around the thing, but we don't always want to activate it, we could tie that into the core functionality. But now you have a class that's doing multiple things, or you can have a wrapper where it's a proxy where you go access it through a proxy. I mean, you do additional stuff on top of it. So it depends on what you're looking for, but if you know that you're going to change some of that functionality, that's where these sorts of additive things seem to be more useful.
Or if you're using different loggers and you're not sure if you want them, you know, your custom one to handle the request or not, then you could hook them together into a chain of responsibility.
Well then, I think we were done with proxy, or at least Zach is.
Yes.
So, chain of responsibility.
That's segue.
Yes. Okay, so has anybody used chain of responsibility in the past?
Not technically. But with the effects system, I needed a way to sort of like get like checking of effect, or like doing sort of just checks to see, is this effect we're looking for or whatever. And so I was creating these queries where you're adding different pieces in one step at a time. And so it was just a chain where it's processing through to see, hey, is this valid in this data or is not? So it's continually adding functionality to figure out what is the question. The difference is it is evaluating at each step of the way. unlike chain of responsibility where it's passing the buck and saying, hey, I'm not going to do it, someone else can handle it. But it's a chain, at least.
Anybody else?
I've not, I don't think I'm trying to think if I've ever used it, because maybe, but when I, like looking through the example that they mentioned, anything that's GUI bubbling is that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I definitely use that, and then like, no, don't bubble and stuff like that with GUIs before.
Yeah, so you've used it without knowing you're using it in that sense. Yeah, so in Windows Forms, the command handling, actually all of Windows, it basically calls a command per process, and then it hands it down to whoever's listening. And so it just keeps going all the way from the entire process space to your window, and then all the way down to the focused button or whatever, and just figures, is anybody going to handle this? And if the answer is no, then it goes off to the OS and then sees if anybody else there, like a keylogger, is like going to track your thing. So I on my keyboard, I have an amazing Microsoft keyboard that has a pause and play button on it. When I hit that button, it first goes to Zoom, and Zoom's like, nah. And so it bounces it up the chain and says, okay, well, Zoom didn't do anything with it. Okay, is there anybody else? And then the OS says, oh yeah, that's play pause for this other app. So it goes and handles it there. And once you've handled it, I've written a lot of event handlers in my Windows Forms careers. So it gives you an event handler reference, right? Here's the thing, and you can like pull it apart and see like what key, what were all the keys that were pressed at the exact moment that the key was pressed and whatever, and then has it been handled? And then you would just set handled to true if you didn't want anybody else to touch it, and you left it as false if you also wanted other things to fire. And so it works real great. Yeah.
I guess in that sense, I guess it kind of worked with the chain of responsibility, because I've done Windows Form stuff
There you go.
in high school. So, but I never really thought of it as a chain of responsibility or understood it at that time.
Yeah. Whenever
So-
you double click a button in Windows Forms and it goes and it creates an on-click handler, and then it has the event thing inside of it, it's following the chain of responsibility in order to give you that. And then you say, hey, handle it or not. I don't know if you know that those are not void methods. They are actually rules. And so if you return true, then nobody else gets it. Same thing with Windows.
I was having a hard
Right.
time thinking about game examples for this though, like within Archmage. Like when I was reading through it, I saw the GUI example. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. I get it. But then I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I think I'm having trouble grokking this one outside of like a GUI context.
I think AI, because I've worked on the AI of the NPCs, there's a lot of, how should I respond to you? Let's consider who you are, and then let's consider, did you kill one of my family members? And then let's consider, and you're like going down all the things until you're like, bing, I hit a emotional response, and then can like feed it back. It's a way of doing that rather than like if, or even worse, nested ifs or whatever, right? Like you're just going off and checking this one thing, and you want a response. Sometimes when you do all those if statements, you actually want overrides. Like, so you put the things that are low priority at the top of the ifs and the things that are highest priority at the bottom. So you get a state change of, oh, I'm happy with you. And then you hit something like, you killed my husband. And then, the state changes to angry. Because if it's changed it to angry and then you had the other one later, then overrode it to happy. Like that would be really dumb, right? So, you can take those giant if things that you're checking, and you can do a chain of responsibility and put it off to a couple of methods. And they give the example of like, hey, everybody can respond or just one person can respond. Like they had a couple of examples on the website of ways of doing it.
That was the first example in Refactoring Guru, and they admitted it's not pure chain of refactoring, or not chain of refactoring, chain of responsibility. But it's a decent way of like turning like those if checks into like objects, so you can then rearrange and order into data. Like it's a case of, hey, instead of just having all of these different pieces. So I think actually we don't technically do this, but it's similar to what we're doing with like damage in combat. So we pass around this damage object, which is different stuff. And so you pass it from one state to another state. And so one place might be worried about, hey, we need to apply armor here. What does armor do to damage? Another part could be worried about other pieces. And so that's a place where you can have lots of different things, but all care about what's happening. And then you can remove them or they can do whatever. It just allows them to each touch the thing in a pipeline.
One thing that I think about that maybe isn't a perfect comparison, but is when you have method chaining that returns a class instance back through and you return that same class instance through. So we've got some of that going on with facts where you can have a check for, hey, if this value is true and we have this value on it as well, return this. And so you end up going, okay, here's a class instance. We end up having this method return itself, return the class instance that we passed into it. And so you're basically able to reuse that class instance on every subsequent call, so that you get this chain going on.
Actually, it's not returning itself, it's returning the next piece, so it does create a chain. But yes.
Okay, I guess I don't. Okay, so for facts, I'm wrong in that case. I've
But
seen
no,
some
no,
do tween is maybe a better example.
that was the example I brought up at the beginning, Josh.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, it's the idea of, yeah, each node connects to each other in a list, and so you're changing up your operation. But all I'm saying is it's not returning itself, because that would be method chaining. It just looks like method chaining.
Okay, I thought that was actually changing. Do tween might be a better example, or do tween, because in that case you're like, hey, add this next, add this next, add this next. You can just keep running. You can keep chaining those methods together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not a chain of responsibility. That's just a chain.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah,
And
none
He's
of those-
trying, folks. He's trying.
the thing that's weird to me about chain of responsibility is I'm trying to think of what are the benefits versus just having one method that has the methods in order and returns the value each time. Because when you chain them together, I can see on the one hand, you can see a call stack, and so that can be handy. I have seen some cases where if you keep adding on to the chain at the end of things like that, then the call stack can get kind of crazy and cause problems.
It's a dynamic chain.
Yeah.
That's the difference. So it's at runtime, you can decide what the chain is.
Okay.
You can have the first check go through and then go, oh, I don't want to do this next check. Like take it out of the list or something.
Okay.
Or add this one in.
Okay, so you're adding items onto the list and removing it from the list on runtime. Okay.
Yeah.
That's where I was struggling with the method chaining, because it's static when you're talking about there, but if
Yeah.
you're adding in items or stuff, that's no longer static. It allows you to configure it to whatever you want. Like you could be reading in data. It could be, hey, you're on a Mac, so we need to add this piece in. So
The other thing with the method chain is just the like, you know that each step of it is doing something. Whereas with the chain of responsibility, it's possible that their previous objects aren't doing anything with it and just passing it along.
in fact, it's possible that nothing ever happens with them. But you're just like, hey, this click was never handled.
Yeah. I wonder, does the camera system in the other project that I made, like where we're having like a camera like moving based off of a different like event being fired kind of system, we just kind of pass it through like, hey, does this work? Do this camera movement. Okay, it's not this camera movement. Let's do this other camera movement. So it's kind of going through like different checklists of like which type of camera are we wanting.
Cinemachine? So what you're talking about?
Yeah. Using Cinemachine a bit, but we were using Cinemachine,
Yeah.
but we were mostly like I had like a class where we were going through like, because we wanted like a special like camera zoom out and zoom back in, right? So we had methods or like a subclass that was doing that kind of specific motion for that camera, and then we had a different motion for we wanted to reset the whole level, and then we had a different thing for when we wanted to, and we were just going through essentially like hey, which event are we wanting, or what's the camera motion we're wanting, do that kind of thing. So it's essentially like there's responsibilities that we're checking through, but I'm not sure if it's really chaining anything. It's just,
From what I recall, I don't believe it was. I think that was closer to like a state pattern, but it wasn't really there either.
okay, yeah.
Maybe?
Yeah, it says
be.
here on the website, you use the chain of responsibility pattern when your program is expected to process different kinds of requests in various ways, but the exact types of requests and their sequence is unknown beforehand. And their answer thing is the pattern lets you link several handlers into one chain, and upon receiving a request, ask each handler, are you gonna process this? Are you gonna process this? Are you gonna process this? And then and they say yes or no. They decide at runtime, like, I'm gonna run the check or I'm not. So if you're in that camera overriding thing, now you know about chain of responsibility. Is that an approach that I can and should take?
Yeah. I think-
Personally, oh, sorry, you go.
I think Michael was more so correct. We were probably doing more like state machine stuff than, but it wasn't really state machine either, but there's more of that than really a chain of responsibility.
Right.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm struggling to see how we use this in Archmage. Maybe we don't right now. Yeah, I mean, is there anywhere where it makes sense to have a chain of responsibility?
I haven't thought of one.
I mean, I think the damage could be an area where we could do that. So as an example, hey, okay, we've got this whole thing where we try to do damage, and we can have a few checks there, like, okay, check the shield. Okay, if we have a shield, then we cause damage to the shield, we keep passing it along. Maybe we reach a point where we have damaged the shield, there's no more damage going through. Okay, we just stop. Okay, we have damaged the shield and destroyed the shield, but and a little bit of damage goes through. Okay, now we also run the animation for character damage and such. And so that's a case where I could see that being, is we're not using it that way, but I could see that way you can stop it anywhere along and be like, okay, well, we damaged the shield, no more damage going through, just stop it, or things like that. So there are certain ways that you could say, don't keep passing this data along right now.
And I hear.
Yeah, and
may not be a chain of responsibility, but I think at this point, I think just learning how to make a chain and using that side of the pattern, I think is still valuable to us and could be of use. So like, even if we're like, okay, it's a chain of something else, I think we can still use that in Archmage.
Yeah, the point is the objects are reusable, right? So if we had something that checks these particular states and gives you a response of yay or nay, then when somebody goes do something else, then they can use that, or they make something new, and now we have a broader and broader pool of checks that you can kind of subscribe to.
I think one place it comes in, something they mentioned is it works often pretty well with composite. So like if we're doing anything where we are saying, hey, we need to care about something in different levels or have like nodes and stuff, then this becomes a useful pattern because it just works with that recursive structure already. So whether that's like, I don't know, Arcopedia where you have like different layers of stuff, or whether it's, hey, you got a map and you have like regions down to subregions down to individual tiles to buildings. Maybe you need to pass something through all of it and different pieces need to do different things with it, or maybe they don't need to do anything with it. But I mean, tooltips is the obvious answer for where we do actually sometimes care.
Tooltip makes sense because you could be like looking at a town and the town is the more specific one. So you want to get the tooltip for that on the map. But if there's not a town, maybe you just want to get hex information or something like that. So it bubbles up.
Shane, trying to say something?
No. I was
Okay.
just, I was just sort of thinking about the tooltip thing. I think it's a good example. And what was the other thing? I thought the damage, you know, I guess my question, what I was thinking about it is, the damage one could be good, but do we already know the checks that we want to do at compile time? So like that was my only thought about whether it makes sense to do damage that way or not.
Well, the oh, hold on, no,
Cool. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, I guess a good example of something that we wouldn't know until runtime is, does the character have a shield right now? Because there's no use in checking for a shield if there is no shield. So that's an example where that could change at runtime.
I'm playing a lot of Orcs Must Die 3 recently, and they have a number of different damage types: arcane, acid, fire, and physical. Physical is obviously the basic one. And so I'm just thinking about, like, oh, this trap, it does physical, and then you get these particular creatures, or this trap does fire. You get a creature and he's immune to fire because he's a fire lord. You could define that through different chains of responsibility. And so I'm a this kind of trap, therefore this is the chain that I would go through. It's a different way of handling elemental attacks versus physical attacks for
Right.
others by changing the actual chain.
So yeah, so each like time you're applying damage, you subscribe to a different chain or something like that. And so yeah, so you're saying in the fire trap you check for fire immunity before you did anything, and then is that kind of what you mean?
I think actually what happens is that you tie it in with like one of the, I don't know what I'm calling, I'm gonna call them building patterns, since I don't remember what we're called, creational patterns, there we go. Where you go through and you create a chain based off of the data. So like if you know that you have a shield, you have some sort of elemental damage, you go through and you say, hey, here's the things that care. And so you create an object, add it to the chain that handles that sort of piece. And maybe that object just is that thing. But it's not just a case of, hey, it's not just location in town. So like we're looking at location in town, they're from the same class. So really, if you just hand a town, they override the method. We don't have a chain of responsibility anymore. You just have a static responsibility because it's that piece. But if you have it instead so that you're looking at a location, that location looks at the town, then you have a chain of responsibility. I don't know if that helped, but I think it's more of an instructional thing rather than going through and saying, hey, this piece and this piece are tied together.
Back to Orcs Must Die. So the reason I brought it up is because the traps are not singular in their damage. So this trap does a certain amount of physical and fire. And so the reason I was thinking of the chain is because you're like, oh, I'm a fire lord, so just toss that fire one from the chain of applied damage. And that would be an interesting way of doing it.
I guess with some of the event stuff I'm doing for like just in time history gen, I'm going through and I'm looking at, hey, on this event, is this threshold met? Is this threshold met? So if I had each of those embodied as a class, which I do, I'm really saying, hey, do I want to, so right now I just have a list of thresholds or a list of prerequisites or a list of impacts, and I go through that list, and if they're all true, then I keep on going forward. But I could swap it out to be saying, hey, this one then calls this other one, which calls this other one, and it can it can exit out early, I guess, is the main thing. So I don't think it actually matters when you have like three things. If, hey, I could just stop processing here as opposed to going through all three of them. But maybe it does. Maybe you're doing something more intensive. Or you have more options, or you just have an option that's go querying a database, and you don't want to query the database if you don't have to.
Okay, anybody else? Any other questions or thoughts? Sean says no. Okay, then let's wrap it up here. Okay, so we'll see you next time with command and iterator. Oh, we've never used iterator before. I look forward to seeing what iterator does.
We've never implemented an iterator. We've used them a lot, but I don't know if we've ever had to implement them.
Yeah.
I think
I've never done it for Archmage, but iterators, yeah, they're super useful, like to implement.
Next week.
Next week. Yeah.
Next week.
Okay, while everybody's here, I did want to talk about a programming thing, something that came
You want
up.
to stop the recording?
No, actually, I think I will record it.
Okay.
Who cares? So I don't know. I think it'd be useful for anybody. But anyways, while we're all here, so we had some discussion several weeks ago about rewrite. Like, should you rewrite, and you know, how do you know when to do that? Having respect for the existing code, battle tested code, etc. So I've just gone through 50 hours of rewrite for took me, I don't know, 5 or 6 weeks or whatever to finally do it. And I have learned something about the code base from doing that. And so I started with all of the incredible principles that I laid out for the rewrite thing when we talked about that. And it took me forever to figure out what the heck this code was doing. It took so long to trace the chain, and I showed you the graphic I made in Visio to be able to trace like what the heck was going on, and I couldn't figure out what exactly was happening. And I have been around the entire time Archmage has been worked on. And so if I can't figure out what's going on, it's even harder for anybody else to figure out what's going on. And so I'm sure you guys all remember what was but for maybe those who are watching, like what was the core issue? Houses weren't showing in the towns. That was the core issue. Houses weren't showing. We had all the other buildings shown, but we couldn't see the fact that they were houses. They wouldn't show up. So it was a bug report. Somebody needed to go in and figure out what was going on. So here's what happened. So the previous programmer had worked on the 2D dungeons and made a randomization system for what he called visual elements in a 2D dungeon. So you have a room and you have maybe a crate and a chest and a shelf, a painting, whatever. There's like all these anchored items all over the place. They could kind of be anywhere. And they would have randomized display. So you had a painting on the wall. Maybe it's not a painting. Maybe it's candles, it's a torch, it's different kinds of paintings or whatever. Those things are randomized. But in terms of function, they all function exactly the same. So we created this thing called a visual element. And then so we had this 2D dungeon thing, and then it was like, hey, later we were like, hey, we should have this way of displaying the town. And so it was like, okay, that's kind of cool. And then it was like, hey, it'd be really cool if you could like click on the building so you can see the inn building, hover over it, click on the inn, and then you go to the inn, rather than looking at this cool picture and then choosing the menu option on the side. So it's up to the player which is better for them. So the person took this approach of oh, well, that's the same kind of problem. So let's, I'll just use the same visual element thing and whatever. And so now you have this dungeon code that is now the town display code. And now when I'm going through and I'm trying to figure out why aren't the houses displaying, I basically have to understand how the dungeon system's working. And here's what makes it worse. We threw out the 2D dungeon system. So the only place where this 2D dungeon system code exists is in the town view for showing towns. And so that's why it's so ridiculously complicated to understand what in the world is this thing doing, because it's so far removed from the model. And I say that in terms of real life data model. Like, what is a town? A town is made up of buildings and trees and fields and whatever. That's a really different data model from a dungeon room is made up of shelves and chests and things inside chests or whatever. And so I spent a lot of time trying to work with what was already there because it already worked. And I just need these stupid little houses to show up. And I spent way too much time on that, on mapping it all out, figuring it all out, what is going on, which classes, there's a number of classes, I don't know, 8 different classes, right? Which ones I actually need to touch and whatever. And then I went and I was like, now I understand it, okay. And I think that, so then I got to the point where I'm like, okay, I rewrote a whole bunch of things and whatever, and started cutting a lot of code. And then I got to this final point where I needed to do the tooltips and the click handler. So there was a click handler object that was placed on top of these buildings in the town view. And it did a whole lot of things. It like checked for the families and the family names and a whole bunch of stuff that was going on there in the click handler, and it was adding edge special effects and figuring out the building size in order to do the the collider and size. There's like all kinds of code in this thing. And I looked at it, I'm like, I don't want to go through figuring out what this does again. And I went back to, what is my objective? My objective is that you can click a building or you can hover over it and see a tooltip. I can do that. I don't need this code in order to do that. So I threw it away in the sense that I created a new class. And what I did was I had the other class, and then I would cut and paste the parts that I wanted in. And when I did that, it was so much faster, and it just worked, and it was so much cleaner. And so I really should have taken that approach with the whole display of the town view. I overvalued the battle tested code, and when I could have made a town display scene in a day. I spent 50 hours on this thing. I could have made it in 8 hours, but I overvalued what it was actually doing. Like, what is the objective? I had a very, very simple, concrete objective. And it doesn't matter if it was old code that was changed in order to do that objective or new code that was doing that objective, as long as it met the objective. And so I want you to have permission or to know that going forward when you're faced with this thing. So for instance, the mage tower, somebody goes to work on the mage tower, it's like, hey, well, we got to respect the battle tested code, it's been working for all this time and whatever, and I just need to tweak performance or whatever and stuff. No, maybe it's way faster for you to create a new class, pull over the things that you need, and have your tests in place to make sure that, oh, it does all the things. It does the things. So as long as you can play the game with the existing things and like, oh, these are the 12 things it does, great, here's my new code, does the 12 things, and off we go. And so I think that's a very different answer than we got when we talked about the rewriting thing. And that's because of how terrible some of this legacy code really is. Right, there's medicine and there's surgery, and I'm very much saying like there's a big need of surgery, and I didn't think that before.
He knows now.
Yeah.
Finally.
Yeah,
he gets
smiles
it.
all around. Finally, he gets it.
I know I told this to Thomas earlier, but I think the bird's eye view was one of the worst remaining holdouts of old
Yeah.
code as well. So like there is bad code still in the project, and there's still a lot of stuff that still needs rewrites, but I don't think it's quite as bad as the bird's eye view. Just because it's, I think Thomas mentioned some of the oldest code still in the project actually at this point.
Yeah.
Like a lot of other stuff has just been removed and changed.
Had I have known, I never would have taken on the task. But, anyway, here's the net positive: is that I did it, and now I know. And yeah, it would have just been easier to create a new class and do all the things. So I hope that that helps. Really, you have to, I guess, do some kind of test on the level of rot or something, or yeah, all the principles before are true, but there's a I don't know, a rot detector that needs to be like there. We're like, this seems pretty rotten. I'm not sure that we should build on it, right? If you're framing houses or something, if you could put your hand through the the brace or whatever, like I definitely don't need that. It's a little harder with code to just push on it and see if your hand goes through, but
If you're falling through the floor, then maybe replace the floor.
maybe replace the subfloor. Yeah.
So I mean, you mentioned that we need some kind of test. Do you have any tests in mind? I mean, something where maybe there's like, maybe you try to start like you created the graph at the end of here's how the code calls itself. And in the past, at one point you mentioned, yeah, create one of those graphs if you're not sure about the code and show that to me. And that's a good way to see, is this rotten? I know that may not always tell the whole story. But is there anything that comes to mind, peer review, like, hey, I think it would be faster to do this, to redo this? Any feedback, any processes, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the incomprehensibility quotient is an important one, because it was real high on this one. Like I like to think I'm at least average intelligence. And so if I'm like spending all day trying to figure out what is this doing? And I was there. I'm the designer of the game, and I was there, and I can't figure out what is this doing already. And then I remembered, oh, it's dungeon code. And once I remembered that, then it was like, oh, okay, now I'm starting to understand, right? So
and then that was also when you were both rushing to get it out for one of the conferences and stuff too, right? So it was just kind of like,
yeah, we had a real hard deadline with Gen Con
Yeah.
to get this demo ready, and we had to start a greenlight campaign ahead of Gen Con so that we could have a Steam key to hand to someone on Gen Con. So we had to pass the greenlight process in order to get it. So yeah,
there was a lot of stuff going on around that time. It wasn't just somebody wrote bad code on a normal day and whatever.
But this town view, this came a year after the whole Gen Con
Okay.
thing. So this town view thing was not under that time pressure. But the system that it was utilizing was, so it was a time pressured bad system for 2D dungeons that was pulled forward to handle town view. And that is the moment when it should have been changed. So the incomprehensible.
Yeah, I just want to check the intuition to use a shared system wasn't wrong, right? It was that it wasn't modified appropriately for towns. Is that kind of what happened, or?
Yeah, so
do you
the
thoughts
idea of like, I've built a similar thing to this, let's reuse it, right? That's a good thing, right? We can all think of examples where it's like, that's basically cut and paste. Like, why didn't you just use the other thing, right? Like, so we all think of examples of that. So that intuition is right, that hunch is right. The problem is, it's a really different problem showing a town view versus showing an interactive dungeon. Yes, they are 2D displays with a false kind of Z dimension on it, sorry, Z dimension on it. Yes, there are click handlers, but there, outside of that, there's like a lot of things that are different. There's no tooltips in the dungeon one, at least to the level that you have for a building about. Yeah, it's not the same model, therefore it's not the same solution. It's not the same problem, so it's not the same solution. But I guess at the surface initially looked like it was the same problem, and so you have this thing kind of shoehorned in order to do it. And so I don't know how, coming in after the fact, which we all are coming in after the fact, I don't know how you look at it and say, oh, that's clearly a rewrite, because that's clearly the wrong reuse. like it's, I don't know how you can tell that by just like trying to map the code and figure it out. So.
Just wondering, because you said you thought it would take you a day, right? But it took you like, I don't know, I'm guessing like 40 out of the 50 hours to figure out what actually was going on and to get it to where you wanted it to be. So is that maybe an indicator that like, hey, it's taken me longer to figure this out than it would be for me to start from scratch, or what I think it would be to start from scratch? Like, is that a good or bad indicator?
Yeah, when we talked about the rewrite, that is everyone's assumption that it's easier for me to write this than it is to figure it out. And so that's why you end up writing new code. In this particular case, like the battle tested, hardened code from the previous years that is 100% working, it's just a click handler in a building. Like, I can validate that, right, so easily, right? This is not transferring millions of dollars between multiple bank accounts and like, oh no, if it fails, like if it fails, I can't click the building. That's all that happens, right? So I think the success test, if it's really fast, simple success test, then the value of the old code goes way down. But if it's very hard to validate, look at WorldGen. It's very hard to validate WorldGen is working well or poorly. Or like, I get a map. If it's working 75%, I still get a map, right? That is something respect the previous code. But I think in this case, it's a building that shows on the screen. I can click it. I think anybody could write that in less than 50 hours.
Or this morning, Tyler and I were looking at this problem with some region detection code, and we're like, there's a bug in here, it's crashing again, trying to figure out how it's figure out. And I don't know how long it took us, Tyler, but we're like looking at this and we're like, this is gonna take longer to figure out what's going on than it is just write it better.
Yeah.
And one of those considerations was, yeah, even if we got it working, it wouldn't have been working well because we had some serious performance issues as well on top of it. And so it's just clear, yeah, okay, so we can just rewrite this method, and it was a different scope because it's just a method. But at least I don't know what Tyler thinks, but I feel it was the right decision to rewrite it.
I think so too. I mean, like yesterday, like I wrote this method like a couple days ago and it was working great and like in a small use case of what I was doing. And then I tried to expand the method or like expand its use case like to where I was wanting to use it. And then all of a sudden it started crashing the game. And then I spent like a few hours yesterday trying to solve this. And then this morning, then me and Michael were looking at it and we're like, you know what, let's just rewrite it. And I think we rewrote it in like probably 30 minutes to an hour. And now I probably spent another hour after that, like fixing it a bit more. And now it's working like great for what we need to do right now. So like in that case, it's like we could have spent like a lot of time trying to figure out like, why is this method not working? Like it looked like it's working, but it wasn't actually. And so it just ended up being a lot nicer to just rewrite it. And it's way more performant now. So
I hope that answers something, like it's something tangible, Josh, of like, how hard is it to comprehend? How hard is it to test success? And if it's really hard to comprehend and really easy to test success, just write it new.
That makes sense. And I mean, you can also do a pretty quick estimate of how long would this take me, and you can add on 50% if you want. If it's like less than a day, and trying to grok this would take me 2 days. I guess it's always hard to. I guess one of the struggles is it's always. I'm not sure the best way to tell how long it will take to understand something.
Yeah,
that's a tough gauge.
The moment I found out that this thing was going to the resources folder, reading all the images, picking one, then going to display the next image, going to the resource folder, reading all of them and picking one. I'm like, oh, there's nothing worth saving here. This is, my hand went right through the rot.
Yeah, I guess there can be some pretty big signs of, okay, I guess one of the things that I'll also do is get blame and see how old the code is, or if there's like some kind of date indicator of, okay, so this is from 7 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's been touched randomly since then. It's probably just kind of gotten mangled over time. And so that's probably what happened. And so I guess there are some cues like that can be helpful too.
I think another consideration is really how solid something is. Like, we've been getting errors from the bird's eye view for like, I think years.
That's true. No one cared. Nobody wanted to touch it.
Yeah. And so like, when you're saying, hey, this is battle tested code and it works, I think what we're actually saying for a bird's eye view is, we don't know if it really ever works.
Yeah, I think that is also important, is that in some cases, to be honest, there is code that has been a part of the code base for a while, but to say it's battle tested seems very generous.
Or like on our previous project, where it was some stuff that we were doing where we had all of these different like state changes and stuff, and I tried figuring out how to understand it, but it was one of the systems that just kept on breaking. Like we had a new request, so we could change it, or we had something else, and it was always breaking. And so I eventually decided, yeah, we're just gonna scrap it all, use the state pattern, go through and just sort of set it up so that it was easier to work with. And I think that was a worthwhile thing because it was core to the game and it kept on breaking. And so I don't know, that's the other consideration to throw in there. Maybe how much big it is as well. Like if it's touching a lot of things, it may sound easier to fix to get my one piece working, but if it's doing other stuff, where it's like, oh, it's also doing this and that, it may be not as easy to replicate quickly.
I mean, something that I think can also be a good check, because this is what I had to do with the travel to problem, was that multiple places were trying to solve the same problem, but using different code, to where it was like, oh, in this case, these two methods are missing, and this one adds this method. And so there wasn't any cohesive way, or there was no one place to go, here's how I travel to a location, because everywhere was calling multiple methods in different orders. And so we were getting these inconsistent results. And so I guess in that case, it was it felt kind of obvious that, okay, we need to, at the very least, we need to consolidate this. But there's obviously something wrong going on here because there's no right way to solve this problem. There's no way that the code base, there is no determined way to do this. Like if we ask, how do I create a character? There's a few different ways, but they're fairly straightforward. When the question was, how do I travel to a location? It's, I don't know. Like, I honestly don't know looking at the code base. And there's not comments to tell me like, don't use this one even, or things like that. It's just like, at least that'd be something. It's not great, but at least that'd be something. So yeah.
Yeah, having tried to figure that out, the new one's definitely way better. Like just being like travel to and it works, that's amazing.
Which is how it always should have been, really.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it should, maybe travel to on game isn't the best way to do it, but at least we have a place now.
I think it started that way and then it started to
Probably.
get yucky and.
I think the problem with travel too is really that it's a thing that a lot of people need to care about. Like everyone needs to do their little piece on travel too, where, oh, when this happens, I need to make sure this happens. And so I think it was always easy enough where, hey, you just call this method and you travel to there, but it might not do the hook that you needed, or just, actually, I think there were two methods, so that was not good.
Yeah, there were a few
But-
different ones.
But
So,
in general, I think, especially.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's definitely more than two.
They're gonna,
yeah, you also had building.visit, and then if you passed your character, and there's like visit player, different things like that. It was, oof.
what I was trying to say, Josh, was
Sorry.
if you're, if not only the feature I'm working on or thing I'm fixing is gonna need to be involved here. But
Yeah,
if other people down the road, I know like, okay, so we're gonna be implementing NPCs, and so NPCs are gonna care about this, or like. There's a level of rot you can live with if it's just, oh, I need to get my one thing in, and then I can never touch it again. But if we know that we're gonna be touching it quite a bit, that seems like a good sign
Yeah.
for rewrite as
That's
we're
a-
working on stuff.
that's a great point. I think of like the thing that Thomas, you talked about last time, which I like the gauge of, will it save me 4 times as much time as I think it will take me? Partly because it's never gonna be as fast as you think. So hopefully, worst case, it's like 2 times or you're in and out. But also I think that it's important to note, not just will it save me 4 times what I put into it, but will it save the team 4 times what I put into it? Because yeah, that's big.
Okay, good bonus, talking about rewrites. Based on some new
Yay.
information. Okay, cool, I gotta run to another meeting, so I'll see you all later.
See ya.